búsqueda y rescate. That is the basic function of the Navy that we need in Cuba, in close cooperation with the Navy aviation. Okay, we have a naval architect here in Miami. I have been working with them in many projects. This is made by a Cuban, by the way, a Cuban who came from the Moriel boat lift, Arturo Barbato. That thing is about $50 million. He built mega yacht. And in Cuba, we have thousands and thousands of people unemployed that we can be putting them to work, building yacht and building platform to look for oil and to generate electricity. And this is the Naval Academy in Cuba. The old, it needs to be rebuilt. That is promoción 14 y 15. Some of them are present right here, Arrechea, Cocoyola, Guzmán. They parade there. And it was the best Naval Academy in Latin America. This is the old stairs, 278 steps. This is the new stair. It's destroyed. And this is the first floor. That is an antique. It was made by the lawyer Rubens, who was secretary of Jose Marti, by the way. And the last, that's the Naval Hospital. We have the father of Mr. Cuervo, who is present here. His father, Dr. Cuervo from Cienfuegos, was the first director of the hospital. The hospital had to go back to the Cuban Navy and should give service to everybody in the maritime field. Thank you for the cooperation.
Muchas gracias, Vázquez. Hoy queremos recordarles que es la víspera del 10 de octubre del Grito de Yara. Hace 145 años, Cuba inició un día como mañana su gobierno de Cuba en armas y queremos rendirles nuestro tributo a la memoria de los héroes de la guerra de independencia, de la guerra de Yara, de la guerra chiquita, de la guerra de Baire y además de todos los que hoy siguen luchando por la libertad de Cuba. Así que y ahora vamos a empezar las preguntas y respuestas del primer panel. De manera que tenemos a ustedes las preguntas que se le hayan tomado nota. Las preguntas para Nick Gutiérrez, Jack Rose, Joaquín Pérez, Andrés Vázquez, Elena Solo Gabriel. Por favor, usted, sí, por favor.
My name is Juan Vega. I actually came here because I was interested in the approach on the privatization issue. I actually worked on the privatization of Embraer, and I actually was involved advising the Mexican group that bought the participation in the cartel. And one of the biggest problems, I even worked on a project with the Swiss group on the privatization or return of property in Germany. One of the biggest problems that you're going to face is culture. And the fact that even though when you mention the rule of law in Cuba has to be not only the rule of law and respect for property, but individual rights, not human rights. It's a misnomer. Human rights is a very broad term brought about by the socialists. Individual rights are brought about by a republic, like this country. Cuba should not be a democracy, it should be a republic. So I think I commend you on it, but one of the things that concerns me is that it was underestimated, the issue of culture that needs to change. When I negotiated in Brazil, I actually negotiated against Lula da Silva. Those people, even though they were in the Communist Party, understood business. The Cuban people nowadays, down to the level of employee, do not understand that. And I think that's going to be one of the biggest problems you're going to have. So I'd like to see if you have any comments.
That's a very good point. Individual rights is fundamental in the future of Cuba. Nick,
yes,
your answer.
I agree. Can you hear me?
Yes.
I agree with that. I should have said individuals to the human rights. Point well taken. Obviously, the German culture is very different than the Cuban culture. I've heard it said that in German farms, they're so orderly that the cows defecate in a specific corner of the potrero. They're different than in Cuba. But you know, I view this really as it's a universal situation. I mean, you know, from the Korean Peninsula to Central Europe to Latin America, you know, freedom is innate in human nature, and I think we've seen waves of Cubans arriving here from Mariel, the Barcelos, etc. We've even seen Cubans in the limited spaces that have been created in Cuba, los mercados libres campesinos, las macetas, los paladares. Cubans thrive with freedom, and you know, as much as the communists have impacted the culture of the people on the island, I think that once the rules are changed, Cubans on the island will guide themselves, will order their priorities through freedom. It's economically rational to do as little as possible if you're getting the same thing as your neighbor, no matter how hard you work. And that's the problem in Cuba, in every communist system. That's why it's in the disaster that it's in. But in Latvia, Estonia, and Lithuania, in Czech Republic, in Slovakia, and in Eastern Germany, the restitution model was used primarily, with certain exceptions and conditions. You had areas that, you know, the Soviet Red Army had occupied. You had areas that were ethnically Germans, where there had been, you know, Jewish confiscations. There was a lot of complications. For example, the Czech Republic, you had to return to Czech Republic and become a resident to make a claim. But you had, you know, a year period within which you could make a claim. Evidence was liberally introduced in administrative tribunals, which turned the process around quickly. And if you look at Estonia and Latvia and the Czech Republic, those are among the top 50 countries in the World Economic Index. Poland, Hungary, Bulgaria, Romania, the former Yugoslavia, always recognized as legitimate owners, usually with inadequate compensation, sometimes symbolic, but you know, and with certain restrictions and conditions. But unless you reverse the systematic confiscations that occurred in Cuba, what new investment is going to have any confidence that their investment won't be confiscated? You know, with great fanfare, we've heard about the empresas mixtas with Casa and Gaviota, the Cuban state military corporations. You know, in 2000, it was 400 empresas mixtas with foreign companies in Cuba. Now there's less than half of that, 190. We've seen top functionaries of these Cuban government investment partners tried for corruption, which maybe they were involved in, but certainly, you know, with the knowledge of the current regime. Until there's a rule of law, you won't have a change in Cuba. And I think that, you know, Cubans are no less capable than other populations of countries that have gone through communist transitions. And you know, here in exile, if you go back 20 years, there was a great talk of la subasta. That, you know, someone had the bright idea that if the new government in Cuba could auction off all the confiscated properties, wow, that would be a great income stream for the new government in Cuba. And some of us said, wait a minute, that doesn't sound right, because that's ratifying the theft. You can't subastar lo que no es suyo, ¿verdad? So that idea, you know, moderated. And today, the Cuban regime, you know, as cast as it is in its communist ideology, is not oblivious to the fact that if they're going to progress into the 21st century, they have a very vulnerable Achilles heel, and that is that everything they have, they stole. So they need us, whether we know it or not, whether they realize it or not. There's been overtures by the regime to some of the groups that I'm involved with, the property owners, and their buzzword is, we want to talk about the reinvestment in and reactivation of formerly owned properties.
Nick?
I'm wrapping up. A nosotros no sabe a nadie. Formerly owned, we're the owners, we just don't have possession. But the fact that they're talking in those terms is heartening, because even they realize that for you know, normalization to occur, they have to do something about that Achilles heel, that systematic confiscation of all the properties on the island.
As you can see, Nick is a truly, real good attorney. Yes.
Jack, I have a question for you. Can you clarify or expand the connection between the expansion of the Port of Miami and the Road of Cuba in that traffic?
Well, I think the point of the slide was to say that the expansion of the port has afforded industries, logistic industries here in the U.S., the ability to not necessarily move freight over the West Coast solely as a means to the Panama Canal. And there is a perception that the Panama Canal is going to open a basin of which Cuba, in a free society, would afford the United States the ability to leverage the Port of Miami as one of the primary hubs to this basin.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. Questions? Yes.
My question may be directed to Doctora Elena Sol Gabrieli. We've heard that everything has to be done in Cuba in a grand scale. Seems to be that what we will need is a project management in a grand scale, so that progress in one area determines when work can begin in another area and pays this development along a project management basis.
Yes. In other words, to avoid the bottlenecks.
No, I agree 100%. The magnitude of the work that needs to be done is incredible. We need all kinds of expertise in management, business, industrial engineering is all going to play a huge role in this. And I think maybe Jack can explain a little bit more from a logistics point of view, but I agree 100%.
Yeah, I guess just one comment to the PM's, right, project management role. I think from a logistics perspective, one of the expectations, one of the challenges we see in Cuba is intellectual capital and lack of skilled labor. So they have no choice but to contract and bring vendors in. Think about it, you're an engineer, architect, accountant. Where do you practice in Cuba? How do you expand your skill sets? How do you develop your skill sets? So I think the first wave will be a significant amount of analytical and engineering capabilities, a lot of project management skills, and I think more importantly, people that are passionate, that want the archipelago, to grow and to flourish. And I think that conviction and that passion has to be tied to project management. It's not just bringing people in to do a job, it's people that want the country to grow and prosper, and I think PM skills will be an integral part of that.
Very good. We have 4 more presentations. It's the second session. We have one more last questions. Do you have a question? Please.
For Nick.
Nick, there you go.
In countries like, let's say, Latvia, how quick did you establish the rule of law, and what was the process?
Remember, Latvia was a country that had been forcibly annexed by the Soviet Union. You had a lot of Russians that had relocated there. You had, elements that cooperated with the Nazis. You had, Jewish, significant Jewish population. You had a real challenge there. Maybe make Cuba look comparatively easier. But you had a very rapid transition. And one of the things that they did, for example, and they kind of set a model for other Eastern and Central European countries, the vexing issues of what do you do with current possessors? I mean, that's become a red herring. People say you can't get stuff back because the family's living in those homes.
But are you counting on going back to the, 1940s law, and what lawyers are going to pass to? Who are the judges?
That's an excellent question. There are very few pre-Castro lawyers that are still viable. You have very good lawyers that have come up under that system. Some of them are in exile. Some of them are still on the island within their limitations. And then you have new generations of Cuban-American lawyers, Cuban-Spanish lawyers. It's going to take a cooperation between all of those sectors. At one time, someone said, well, we can hire Argentinians, judges, to be the new judiciary. That was immediately shot down by Cubans. But in Latvia, there was for example, a 7-year period of rent control imposed. So if you lived in a property that had a former owner and you had been living there, no one gets title under communist governments. In Cuba, in Eastern Europe, etc. You would have 7 years within which you paid a controlled rent to the owner, almost a symbolic rent. Before you paid it to the government, now you paid it to the owner. At the end of that 7-year period, there was a government-mediated process by which the owner could obtain the possessory right, or the possessor could buy the owner's title right. And that was able to not allow the issue of current possessors to derail the overall restitution effort. That was very, very effective. Cuba hooked up with its own method, but it has some models to follow, and it has some pitfalls to avoid from the experience of other countries that have gone through a similar process.
Thank you, Nick. We're going to continue now, open the second session with Stephanie Fernandez. She is coming in behalf of Jose Ramon Mas. And Stephanie, please. She's a consultant with Profitality and Director of Business Development. And by the way, let me mention, Stephanie, that you are talking in behalf of the son of a dear friend, Jorge Mascarosa. So welcome.
Thank you. Good evening, everyone. As Pedro had mentioned, my name is Stephanie Fernandez. I'll be discussing the business enterprise Cuba's industrial future on behalf of Jose Mas, who created this presentation but couldn't make it today. So we'll start off the presentation by discussing 3 different types of economic systems. We have a planned economy, a mixed economy, and a market economy. A planned economy is, as we all know, a socialist economy where the government owns all of the economic resources and state planning. A mixed economy is a shared government and private ownership of the economic resources where many of the economic decisions are made by individuals, but the government still plays a significant role in the allocation and the distribution of these resources. And lastly, a market economy, which is mostly private ownership of these economic resources. So changing the role of a government. We'd have to change from a planned economy to a market economy. A planned economic system has been in Cuba for